Welcome to Home Education Matters, the weekly podcast supporting you on your home education journey. Hello and welcome to another episode of Home Education Matters. And today I'm joined by Astrid Vinje, and we are going to be talking about world schooling. And Astrid is a bit of a world schooling expert, and I've also done some world schooling in my time. So I've been looking forward to this episode. So Astrid, first of all, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. And do tell us a little bit about your homeschooling journey.
Yeah, thanks for having me on this podcast. So we world schooled from full-time from 2018 to 2021. And I have two kids. At the time, they were 5 and 8 when we were doing that. And prior to it, they were in, childcare and regular school. And so it was a bit of a transition for all of us. And my husband and I were working full time. And so we'd never done homeschooling before, but we were also just excited to try this out as a family. But I want to add too that both my husband and I, we met working at a childcare center before we got married. But and so we did have some education background. Granted, it was for an after school program and for preschool, but still there is the thought of homeschooling our kids for 4 years didn't really deter us, because we were we've had experience with education and we also know how to interact with kids. So it wasn't intimidating for our family.
It must have been quite a big move, though, to go from your children being in a kind of mainstream educational setting to world schooling, because all the world schoolers I know homeschooled before they world schooled, so it felt maybe less of a jump. But for you, you went not only from mainstream education to you doing the educating, I'm assuming, but also you went from having a base to being a bit nomadic. So that it was still quite a jump for you, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I would say we did this. Well, my kids are back in regular school now, traditional school now, because we've settled in one place for a bit. But even my son now, he's like, Mom, I don't want to be in school anymore. I want to go back to homeschooling. But my daughter really likes the social aspect of it. So anyway, so we did world schooling or homeschooling for 4 years. But I would say that first 2 years was us trying to figure out what is a good rhythm, experimenting with what works for our kids and for ourselves. And also the first 2 years, I was the one that was primarily doing all the homeschooling stuff while my husband was working. So it was it kind of was that gendered roles, the mom teaches and the husband works. And then I got a job. And so I was well, this is not going to be possible. Now I have to work full time too. So let's divide it up more equitably. And so even then, just during all those 4 years, we, as you're probably the same for you too, it's a constant journey and constantly evolving. And you're always looking at, okay, this was working for a while, but now it's different. Or my kids now are interested in XYZ topics. So let's focus our attention on that. And I think that's actually the wonderful thing about homeschooling in general, is that you have the freedom to really dive into these subjects that your kids are interested in, instead of always sort of following this curriculum. No, we have to get done with these lesson plans because we have to meet some state mandate of, this testing by the end of the year. And so you need to be ready to go by the end of the year. Homeschooling, in my mind, is great because you can say, yeah, okay, this can serve as a framework, but we don't have to follow it to a T. We could say like, let's focus a lot on this now, but then, you know, relax a little bit later on when our schedules are a little more busy or when we don't have the same energy. Yeah. There were definitely a lot of moments of crying as we were like, you know, going through like grammar lessons or math lessons, and just like those first few years were definitely hard. I can say.
Before you set off, did you have a sense of what it was going to look like? Did you have a kind of idea in your head, okay, we're going to stick to sort of lesson times, or did you know that you were going to embrace that flexibility and go with the children's interests right from the start?
So I have a couple of my siblings homeschooled their kids, so I had them as like examples. So I kind of knew like, well, the school day is probably not going to look the same as like a regular traditional school day where, you know, the kids are in their seats for 6 hours a day. And then I had, prior to traveling full time, we had met with other families as well, who had traveled full time or done like a big gap year, like what we were wanting to do. And so we talked with them of like, well, what, you know, we had questions like, what does schooling look like for you? What does education look like for your family? The biggest advice that I got from them was that transition period from being in a traditional school system to homeschooling. You really need to give yourself some time to deschool, not just for your kids, but for yourself too. And like, get to know your family dynamics, get to know like how you learn, how your kids learn, and like not necessarily like stick to a lesson plan. And so I really tried to take that to heart of like, but, you know, part of me was like, okay, I think a month is fine. You know, I'm very like type A person. I'm like, let's get this done. But I did try and like give myself some grace of like, okay, this isn't working. Let's try something different, or, you know, not try and put pressure on myself or my kids to stick to a schedule just because it's all arbitrary, right? Like, so, yeah.
Did you find that the longer you did it, the more flexible you became and more responsive to your children's interests? Or did you find that the longer you did it, the more you slipped into a structure and a routine and a rhythm of the day that fitted all of you?
I think it was a little bit of both. And it kind of varied depending on what it was. So like, we did end up going and slipping into more of a routine, especially once my like husband came on board with some of that too. Like by the end of our last year, I would say like we kind of, our routine was like he would do math with them in the morning, and then the kids would have like an time to do independent reading and some kind of like creative creation time. Like they could draw on their iPad, or they could, my son was really into Minecraft at the time, so he could like build things on Minecraft, so that it was like you're not just consuming stuff, but you're like creating things. And then when I was done with work, I would do like other subjects like writing or social studies or language arts with them. And they also we wanted them to learn a language, so they had to do like at least 10 minutes of Duolingo. So it was like, it felt like it was kind of a schedule then, because they had these chunks of time that they needed to work on during the day. And so I think in that sense, it became more of a routine. But in terms of like when we were learning about like the other, besides math, like the other subjects, we ended up becoming a little bit more flexible, and it was dependent on where we were at in our travels. So like, for instance, when we were in Indonesia, we happened to be driving home one night, and my kids were looking at the stars and like, I'm curious, like, what are those, you know, like, what are those stars about? Or like, what's this like what, I want to learn more about the moon and the phases of the moon and all that stuff. And so then we just ended up launching into a whole solar system unit after that conversation. So like, and then that would get incorporated into our like learning time. And so, yeah, so I think that's why I say like, it's a little bit of both, because it really depends on where we were at. Oh, I guess I could think of another example, like when we were visiting Spain, we spent 3 months in the Andalusia region, and that part of Spain is like so fascinating because it has like Phoenician roots, and like the Romans came through, and the Moors, and all of these like influences from different cultures. And so we did like, while we were in Spain, did like a historical unit studying like all those different civilizations that kind of came and passed through the area of Spain that we were at. And so that was fun to do, but then we still incorporated, we still had our daily like math things that we needed to do, and our daily Duolingo and some language arts. But then there was this other like component where the kids can sort of learn based off of what they were interested in or what we were doing at the time.
So it sounds like you responded to what the children were interested in and responded to the places where you were at the time. Did you, when you were planning the countries that you were going to go and visit, did you have one eye on the kind of educational aspect, or did you plan your itinerary really based on what was logistically convenient to do?
Yeah, it was more the latter, like what was convenient, because I feel like every place has a learning component to it. And so even if, like we were house sitting in Birmingham in the West Midlands in the UK, and I had no idea what that was about, but it was just because like we got a house sit over here, let's go over here and spend 2 weeks. And then we found out like that area of the UK played such a big role in the Industrial Revolution, and we visited like the Black Country, like Living History Museum, and visited like an old, so then we were like, okay, well, let's learn about the Industrial Revolution then while we're here. So it really like for us, like being someplace and seeing something that is curious to us, and then like leaning into that to learn more. And so we didn't really go to places because of like with an educational goal in mind, but the learning just kind of naturally came.
As someone who was born and brought up in Stourbridge, I find the idea that you world schooled your way to Dudley absolutely hilarious, because it's
right,
really famously not a holiday destination.
I know, we have friends. We met like friends in the UK. We met friends in Mexico who are from the UK. They lived in Gloucester. And so when we came to visit with them, we're like, oh my God, we love Birmingham. We love the West Midlands. And they're like, why? Why would you like that area?
I have to say I'm a very proud, loyal kind of person from that area, because I think Birmingham is such an amazing city. It's really underrated, actually. Dudley, however, Dudley's wonderful. It hasn't got a lot going on. It's got the zoo and the Black Country Museum, but it sounds like you certainly did the best of Dudley. When you were spending your time world schooling, did you kind of slow travel and immerse yourself in the countries, or did you work you're nodding, so I'm guessing you kind of spent your time in different places, did you?
Yeah, we tried to spend at least a month in one place. So some countries we spent like 6 months, and then like Mexico, for example, we did, I think over the course of the 4 years, we spent about almost a year in Mexico. Like we spent 6 months, and then we left, and then we came back and spent another 5 months, and then left in another month. So, but, and Indonesia was kind of similar. We spent 6 months there. And while we were in those countries, we would aim to spend at least a month in a city at a time, so that you get, like, in my mind, you get like a better experience of a place if you slow down. Like, then you're not just seeing like the highlights, you're also seeing like the daily life. We were taking public transportation to go from place to place, or we were going to the market to get our groceries, or just hearing, like, in Indonesia, we were on the island of Java in Yogyakarta, and you could hear the call to prayer, multiple times during the day, and that just kind of becomes like the soundtrack of your day. And you can get that I think, when you're traveling a little faster, but it doesn't become, like, in my mind, it doesn't impact you as much, because it's just like another like novelty. It doesn't become like more of a habit or routine.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I lived in Bahrain for a few years, and we used to time our morning lessons to the call to prayer. Not the very earliest one, not like 5 a.m., but the latest one. And when we came back to the UK, I had to try to find it on the radio, because I'd got so used to making the rhythm of the days match around, oh, look, there's the call to prayer, and everybody knew what it meant. Everyone was like, okay, like, let's get our lesson books out. And you get, when you're taking a while in a place, you can get absorbed into that kind of thing. How did you find yourself getting absorbed into local culture and local friendships? Did you find that difficult?
In some ways it was. I really wanted to connect with like local families more, but during our travels, we ended up connecting with other traveling families more often than like local families. And part of it too, I think part of it was like a cultural barrier, especially in places where, like, we knew the language, but we weren't, like, as familiar with the culture. But I think the other part is other traveling families were like kind of a similar mindset as us, versus a family who's like settled and they have their established routines and things like that. Like, when we were traveling and we met another family, we'd be like, oh, what are you doing today? Well, my schedule's free. Okay, well, let's go and explore this part of the city, or like, let's go hang out. Okay. And then we would spend like, days like that until they have to go or we have to go. And there's like a little bit more flexibility and kind of like an organic relationship that develops in that sense. And then also, I think because you both know that this relationship is transient, you just like get to the heart of getting to know each other faster, versus like, small talk and like, you just start talking about like the things that matter. I don't know.
Yeah, that's so true. That is so true. Actually, it's funny you say that, because some of my greatest friendships have been Worldschooling friendships. And yeah, I've been in the UK now for quite a while. And I've never really been able to put my finger on it, but you're right. When you are Worldschooling, when you meet up with other Worldschoolers, you do tend to get down and dirty quickly, don't you? You tend to sort of like have the big conversations, and I don't know, you connect in quite a deep way, don't you? How did your children find these kind of transient friendships and transient socializing? Because they were quite young, so I'm guessing it was all right.
Yeah, I think in general, I think it was all right. I think I have two kids. The oldest is my daughter, and then the younger one is my son. Actually, we have an older son too, who's in his 20s, but he didn't travel with us because he was already living his life in New York City. But he would meet up with us as periodically during our travels. But our daughter, I think, had a harder time because she was starting to go through like the early parts of puberty as we were traveling, and so, that age, you want to develop closer relationships with your peers. And while we did meet families while we were traveling, because they would be like, we'd spend time with them and it would be like intense time together. And so they would like make connections, but then we'd go our separate ways. And I think relationships as kids is different than relationships as adults, because I would still consider those families as like close friends of ours. But, you know, from a kid's point of view, I think if you're not seeing them every day, then that like relationship kind of is harder to maintain. And so I think my daughter especially was feeling a little more like lonely and wanting some more permanent relationships instead of, or friendships. And that was what prompted us to, partially what prompted us to come back to the US and settle in one place for a while, was so that she can come back and have that like more not, I don't want to say stable, because I also don't, but like just a more like less transient relationship, I guess is the right word for that.
Yeah. And did you always know that you were going to be gone for X amount of time? Was it something that you said to yourselves, okay, let's go traveling for like 2 years, 4 years, something like that? So were you always going to return and put them back into the schooling system?
Yeah, we had originally planned for 3 years, and I don't remember why we chose 3 years, but I think it had to do with like probably we felt like 2 would be too short. And so we wanted to have like a 3rd year to kind of, and then like we're kind of like we wanted to give ourselves time to visit like the different countries that we wanted to go to. Each of us had like a choice of 3 locations. This is again, like my like type A personality. I'm like, okay, let's make it fair. And we'll have every person pick 3 locations that they want to go to. So we'll have 12 total. It didn't end up working out. Like we didn't go to all the places that we wanted to go to, but we felt like 3 was a like good enough chunk of time, and then they wouldn't be, and we did intend to bring them back into the school system. It ended up being 4 because we had a huge pandemic during the middle of the trip. And so we spent 7 months of 2020 in the US staying with my parents. And so because everything was closed, we kind of did more like US travel as much as we could. So we spent time with my parents. We spent some time in San Diego, where my in-laws are, and then New York City, where my stepson is. And then once like things kind of opened up again, in 2021, we decided to like spend some time in Mexico and then travel around after that. So yeah, because of the pandemic, like our trip, it complicated things a little bit more, because like, you know, in 2021 travel was open, but there was like restrictions on where you can go, and like, you know, you had to be vaccinated in some cases. And so that really like changed some of the places that we had initially thought we would go one place, but then we ended up going into another place.
So during the main bulk of COVID, you sort of resettled back in America just for that period, and then you resumed and then you tacked that onto the end almost, because you'd missed out on that opportunity during the 3 years.
Yeah.
Good planning. I like that. So what were the main countries that got missed, and who got bumped off what got bumped off the list?
So we had wanted to go, let's see, I think we got most of it. I wanted to do Ghana, but we didn't end up, and my son wanted to do Madagascar, because at the time he was like really into lemurs and aye-ayes. And so, but both of those, the African continent still eludes us. We still haven't, I mean, I've personally traveled there, but the rest of the family hasn't yet. So that got bumped off the list. And then I think initially my daughter wanted to go to China, But when we started looking at like visa stuff and like being able to work remotely while we're there, we just decided that it was harder to navigate. It was just like, I think it's possible, but then you have to like, it was just too much of a hassle for us to do that. So then we're like, well, let's go to Vietnam instead, as like a, there's some Chinese cultural stuff, so you could get that, and we ended up liking Vietnam too. And then there was another place, I'm trying to remember. Oh, I wanted to go to Kosovo because I was pregnant with my daughter when I traveled there, and so I wanted to like bring the family to like this place where it was kind of where I got the inspiration for her name. Her name's Mira, and so it was like, I don't know, just a word that I heard. Like Mir was a word I heard in Kosovo, and so I was like, oh, I like that. Let's name our daughter Mira. But yeah, so that got bumped off of our list as well. But then we ended up adding like the UK, and we ended up adding Spain, and so there's like places that we thought we were going to spend time in, but then ended up going somewhere else, and it was like a better choice in my mind. I mean, I guess I don't know what I missed out on, but like the replacement was great,
So you bumped Ghana and Kosovo and went to Birmingham. That is, I promise anyone listening, that is my last gag about going to Birmingham.
I swear, we love it. So
yeah, I love it too. So you mentioned something there that I wanted to ask you about, and that was visas. How did you go about working out the visas? Did you have to kind of plan it sort of militarily in advance? Did you have to do what's it called, like border trips and things like that? What's it called, where you cross borders, border runs? Did you have to do that kind of thing?
So let's see. I guess we were fortunate that a lot of the countries that we ended up going to didn't really have as many like complicated visas. Like Mexico, as a US citizen, we could stay there for 6 months without having to apply for, or pay for a visa. I mean, I think they grant us a 6-month visa on arrival. And then I think the UK is the same way, where you could stay for up to 6 months. Indonesia, let me think. We applied, let's see. Yeah, we did a 2-month visitor visa. The visa laws have changed now, but like we worked with a visa agency for Indonesia to get us like a 2-month one, and then you could renew for a month up to 4 times. So that gave us like the whole 6 months essentially. And so the challenging part for that was, and I don't even know how we managed to do this, but when we would do the renewals, we had to put our passports with the visa agent. And the visa agent was based in Bali, but we were traveling around other parts of Indonesia too during that time. And so they had our passports, and we just had photocopies of our passports. And somehow that was okay for us to travel to the other islands, like on a plane. Like when I would go and check in, they're like, "Where's your passport?" I'm like, "Oh, well, it's being renewed, but here's a photocopy of our passport." And they're like, "Okay." I was just like, "Is this really going to work?" But I don't know. I think the visa laws may have changed now, but at the time, like we were able to just travel with photocopies of our passports and just say that it's like in the visa office. So.
The amount of times you have to hand your passport over. I remember when I was in Thailand, I wanted to rent a golf buggy, and I wanted to rent it for the whole time we were there, which was going to be like a year, 2 years. And they were like, "Okay, you need to give me your passport as a deposit and you take the golf buggy." And I was like, "I'm not going to give you my passport for like 2 years." So you just keep my passport. And they had this little tin box, and she was like, "Yeah, I'm just going to put it in here with the other passports." I was like, "Are you mad? I'm not going to give you my passport." And in the end, I photocopied the passport, and I was like, "You have the photocopy. I have my passport, but even as it was, it did seem a bit of a security risk, I have to say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, well, yeah, so that was one. And then I think the other place, and that was partially why we didn't end up going to Ghana and China too, is because of like just the challenges of even acquiring a visa. When we were in, let me think, when we were going into Vietnam, we were in the Philippines. So then we just applied for the visa while we were in the Philippines. So yeah.
And what about the burning question that I'm sure everybody asks you, which is how did you sort of work out how you're going to fund it? Did you save up in advance? Did you think to yourself, okay, we're gonna like your husband, for example, was going to work and then you both worked? Did you know in advance, or did you sort of leave it in the lap of the gods a little bit?
Well, no, we didn't have any savings to go into it. And so and this is probably like the biggest blunder we made. But we didn't have savings. We also had like a pretty big chunk of credit card debt. But we were thinking, oh, well, it's going to be so much cheaper when we travel that like we'll save money and we'll be able to pay off our credit cards. And then my husband also was like, well, because travel is going to be so much cheaper, I'll just go half time too. And so that first year and a half, we blew through like our money so fast. And that was partially why I was like, I started working again full time as well. Was like, okay, this is not sustainable. We need to actually have some actual income coming in. So my husband went back to full time and I got a full-time job. And then fortunately we were able to sort of course correct and stuff. But yeah, we didn't have savings. And I still would say like if I give advice to other families is like be realistic about what your travel costs will be. Like the misstep that we took was that we were very vague. We had like a lot of vagueness in terms of like costs. Like, well, yeah, I think it'll be cheaper, but I didn't sit through and like work out like this is the cost of living in this country, or this is the cost of living here. This is what the cost of airfare will be. I just assumed that it would work out. But like once you kind of determine those costs, then you can also look at like what assets do you have that you could like, have leverage as income. So we had a house. We didn't end up selling the house. I guess if we had sold it, we would have had some funds to be able to travel. But I don't think we would have made that much money from the sale just because we had only bought the house a year and a half prior to traveling. So and the housing market in the US right now, especially where we are, is just like, you don't want to sell because then when you come back, you're not going to be able to afford the same amount of house. So we wanted to keep it and we ended up renting it out, which helped to like offset the mortgage, but we didn't really get much income from that. But if you have, so renting out your house can be like an option, and then just other kinds of like figure out like what your skills are and whether you can do it online so that you can earn some income while you travel. I really feel like unless you're willing to like live budget travel for 4 years, which I think in reality, like our family was not prepared to do that. And we didn't, or like our family didn't really want to do that. And so I think it's important to have some kind of income while you're traveling.
Did you have a job that was easy enough to convert into doing online, or was that something that you almost reskilled for or made a kind of segue into?
The job that I had before we left, I was working as like a project administrator for a nonprofit organization or an NGO. And I had talked with them about like potentially working remotely before we traveled, but their HR person was like, talking with our and I think this depends on the company and what, the risks they're willing to take, or, how cautious they want to be and stuff. But the company that I worked for, their stance was, if you're going to be traveling and working for us, we would want to be registered in all of the countries that you're living in. And so we don't want to do that for you.
Yeah.
So like,
seems reasonable, actually.
I will, yeah. I'm going to go and then, so then I had to so when it came time to get a new job, after, a year and a half into our travels, I, specifically was looking for remote, like things that were advertised as remote. And in some cases, like, some companies will say, well, your permanent address is here in US. And so we will still consider you as a US, resident, because this is where your permanent address is. So I think it just depends on like how much risk a company is willing to take on your employer is willing to take on that.
So
and then you can also, do your own job or have your own business, which I have 2 websites that are travel focused. And so part of, so like the first year and a half, I wasn't working, but I was also doing like freelance writing and some like part-time work based off of like my writing and blogging business.
It sounds to me like advice that you might give would be to research the countries you're going to and the actual cost of living, and having a realistic budget, and then also maybe having a sense of a plan for remote work that you can do if you want to. Are there any other tips that you would give people that are thinking of starting out on a journey such as yours, for whether it's 1 year, 4 years, whatever?
Yeah. I think, and this kind of ties back into like the homeschooling, world schooling. I think the other tip would be to like take some time to figure out what your family wants, or like understand the culture of your family, like it's easy for somebody to say, oh, well, you can just budget travel and it's so cheap. But we tried it and we realized like our kids like AC, and like my husband and I both need a place that has Wi-Fi, and we want to be in a place that's like central to restaurants and things so that we can go out and eat. Like all of those things end up making, the lodging more expensive, or like going out and eating. Like that's just something that versus like cooking at home all the, meals at home all the time. That's just something that our family likes to do. And I think, because you're going to be spending like, 24/7 with your family, really like focus on prioritizing like communication and prioritizing connection, and like figure out how you best communicate with each other about your needs and your feelings and stuff, because that's going to be crucial when you're traveling full time.
How important do you think that is, that you are able to have a family unit where it's okay for the children to kind of be, yeah, I'm hating this?
I think it's important. To me, it goes back to like creating a safe space for your kids, right? Like I grew up in a family that was a little bit more like traditional, the parents are the authority and they make all the rules, and they, and the kids just have to follow along with that. But I think our generation, or this, as subsequent generations are a little bit more, the families are, I feel like, are a little bit more democratic in that, like the kids do have a say, because ultimately, like my goal for my family is just to have like a harmonious home. You know, if my kids are hating it, then that's not nice, a pleasant experience for me, you know? And so, yeah, it is important in my mind to like make sure that every member of the family, whether it's, you know, the parents or the kids, are able to express like their needs, and if something is not feeling right for them, that they have a space to be able to share that, and then the rest of the family can help to resolve it.
Did you find that traveling together forged a closer sense of connection?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's a little sad because I think now that we're settled, we've sort of, and partially I think it's because, you know, the kids have gotten older too, and so it's also like a teenage years type of preteen, teenage years type of thing too. But yeah, we definitely, being going through that travel experience definitely helped us connect more as a family, and just enjoy each other's company. We recently took a trip, like it was just for their school holiday. We did a week in Mexico, in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. And it was nice because like we intentionally, like we chose a Airbnb that was in the romantic zone, kind of close, not close, but not too close to like some of the restaurants or like the central part of the city. But we also intentionally decided not to fill every day with an activity, like, you know, with sightseeing and stuff. We were like, okay, well, we'll do sightseeing on these few days, but then, you know, throughout the week, we'll also have chill days, chill out days, as we call it. And that was really nice. And it reminded me of, you know, our travels and how like our daily life would be like. And I think that having those periodic moments of travel helps to like recenter our family to that like connectedness that we had when we were traveling.
How wonderful. That sounds such a lovely way of reconnecting, is by going somewhere new or going somewhere and almost kind of having a nostalgic memory of your world schooling. So talking of nostalgic memories, I know that when I look back on all the countries I went to, I have so many happy memories, like so many come flooding to mind. But do you have a favorite moment that when you think back to your world schooling, you think, oh, that was wonderful?
Oh man. It really is it's hard to pinpoint one because we have a few. As you were describing here, I remember we stayed, when we were in Indonesia, we stayed at this like eco lodge or eco resort in Bali. And they had like a yoga shala that was open for the guests to use, and it was just basically like not a gazebo, but like an outdoor thing, and you could see like the ocean in front of you and stuff. And so in the mornings, we were only there for a few days, but in the mornings, the kids and I and my husband would like go down there, and we would sit and do like 5-minute meditation just in quiet, and then you hear like the ocean views. And we did this actually, we did these like meditations in different places around our travel. So we did it when we were staying at like a farmhouse in Italy. I think I remember that. And then like in Mexico, and in some of the houses we were staying in Mexico. And so like that moment, or those moments are nice for me to remember, because it's like, it's not like the big, you know, exciting moments, but it's this like quiet moment together as we're like connected. And yeah, the kids are like, do we have to do this? Blah, blah, blah. But they were still like doing it with us. And I think the other moments are of just us walking, you know, from our Airbnb, where we would stay, down into the center of the city, and just like walking along the streets, going to a restaurant that we're going to eat at. And yeah, like in Spain, we stayed in a apartment that was probably like 10 minutes away from the beach, like the Mediterranean. And so we would walk down the hill and like go to the beach and have lunch overlooking the Mediterranean. Like it was very surreal in my mind, but just those are moments that I miss.
I think when I think back on some of my happiest moments, they're very similar in that they're moments of stillness and being together. And they're not the big, the big moments, not like the pyramids and things like that. It's really just these slightly innocuous moments of calm togetherness and stillness. I think that's exactly what I remember too. So, okay,
Yeah.
so for all of our listeners, do you want to let them know, you mentioned a website and I think you've got a blog. So do you want to let our listeners know where they can find you on social media and online?
Yeah. So my main website is called The Wandering Daughter, and that's where you'll find a lot of the articles I write about the places that we visited. And then also articles specific to Worldschooling and helping families prepare for a gap year, or even just like, incorporate Worldschooling into their travels. And then I also have a website called Mexico Family Travel, which is specifically about Mexico. We spent so much time there, and I just, through the travels, I really wanted other families to be able to fall in love with Mexico, not just as like, a resort beach destination, but like a lot of the cultural stuff and like the cities that maybe people wouldn't necessarily visit because it's not on the tourist list. So yeah, Wandering Daughter and Mexico Family Travel. And then the other thing I wanted to share was when we came back from our travels, I put together an ebook and it's called Hey Kids, Let's Go Travel. And it's a family gap year guide, essentially, like a how-to of how for families to prepare for their own gap year. So I cover like the steps like for prepping for that, like and different topics of like what to do, how to budget for or like what to think about when budgeting for your trip. What are some, options for funding your travels? What are ways that you can educate your kids while you're traveling? And then like different types of accommodations you can stay at, like options for accommodations, not just like we mainly stayed in Airbnbs, but we did like house sitting, and we did like we've recently started doing like home exchange and like camping and stuff like that. So definitely a helpful tool, I think, for families who want to jump into that like full-time travel lifestyle, but maybe aren't sure of how to start.
That's wonderful, because I know that it feels like such a big move. We slightly fell into it, but I think if you were to sort of plan it in advance, I think I would be quite nervous and have a lot of questions. So that sounds like a really helpful resource for people to have some of these questions answered before they set off. So Astrid, thank you so much for joining me. It's been really enjoyable. I love talking about Worldschooling. I could talk about Worldschooling all day. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's Home Education Matters podcast. See you at the next one. Have a lovely day.